to your seating area. Thank you, and enjoy the performance.
Hello, I'm Richard Bryant, Executive Director of Musco Center for the Arts at Chapman University here in Orange, California. Welcome back to our At the Musco online series, where you can connect in real time with faculty, students, professional artists, and one another, all engaged in what we call the art of community. Last October, Musco Center hosted our first Mostly Blues Festival on the lawn of our beautiful Aiken Arts Plaza right out front here. This free outdoor event brought our community together to celebrate the blues for its central place in American music. We are pleased to be able to dive even deeper with further discussion about blues roots and legacies, the passing down of oral and musical traditions, and the future of blues music in this Mostly Blues series conversation. This evening, we're joined by artists and educators Dr. Paul Apodaca and Sean Heim for an in-depth conversation about the history of blues music and the expansive diaspora. This is an interactive discussion, so please join in through the chat feature on YouTube or Facebook to make comments and ask questions. Now, here's your host, Musco Center's Napoleon Gladney.
Thank you so much, Richard. Good evening and welcome to our Mostly Blues series. I'm Napoleon, your host this evening. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. If you have joined us for a previous At the Musco online event, welcome back. Please take a moment to like, follow, and subscribe to Musco Center on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. You can also join our email list for updates on new happenings and online events at muscocenter.org. We will be announcing some new online events in the coming weeks. Please ask your burning questions in the chat, and we will try to get them answered live at the end of the conversation. We are so excited to welcome Dr. Paul Apodaca and Dr. Sean Heim. Happy to have you both here with us tonight. Welcome.
Thank you for having us. Great to be here.
Thank you.
Paul, how are you this evening? Thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here.
And Sean, welcome. How are you tonight?
I'm doing wonderful. Good to see you and good to be here.
Fantastic. So let's just hop right in. Let's start with learning more about both of your connections to the art of blues music. Sean, what are some of your first memories of blues music?
Well, I guess my first memory of blues music was hearing kind of British performers impersonate American blues players. So I grew up in the 70s and I was listening to Jeff Beck and Eric Clapton and Keith Richards, and even my earliest memories when I was around 10 or 11 of Beatles records and all the things they were impersonating. And then I guess I realized that I would listen to them speak about their influences, and I said, well, I have to go grab a hold of these influences myself and kind of see what the roots of this kind of style of playing is. I was deeply interested in it. I had just started playing guitar about the time I was 10, 11 years old. So that was kind of my pathway in, was through the kind of British invasion, and that's just the time I landed at the airport, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Nice. Paul, what about you? What are your early connections to blues music?
Well, I'm a little bit older, so we moved into Tustin in the early 1950s, and this was the middle of nowhere out here. The Santa Ana Freeway ended in Santa Ana. It was a 2-lane road from Santa Ana all the way to San Diego, so Tustin was really an out-of-the-way place. Only 2,000 people in the town, nothing but orange groves. And at night, I used to set up a crystal radio up in the window of my bunk bed, and I would dial in blues stations coming out of LA. And when I got a better radio, I could start to pick up some other stuff coming in from across the country. So I'd be listening to blues as a kid, and very, very excited about it and stuff. But there was no one to share it with in Tustin because there's just nobody else there, and there was certainly no one listening to blues music. And uh, the only guys that I knew that understood the stuff were old friends and family members up in L.A. So when I'd go up to L.A., then we could get together with other guys and we'd be playing. And then as we got older, we'd start going over to some of the blues clubs over in South Central and other places and sneaking in the back doors or just walking in. And people would leave us alone, which was very kind of them. We were underage and everything else, but they just left us alone. We just sat there and we would just watch, and then we'd all start playing in bands and stuff and teaching each other. So I'm the same age as Keith Richards and those guys and stuff. So I was listening to the same stuff those guys were listening to, and we were those bands. I'm saying that were playing at the end of the '50s and into the early '60s. You know, playing in garages, playing at weddings, playing at anywhere we could play. And so when we heard the British stuff, we thought it doesn't sound American. It doesn't sound right. It's better in some ways because these guys are using notes that we would never choose because they knew modal scales and stuff, and so they knew how to make it dramatic and make it theatrical. But the actual feel that was there in blues music, they weren't quite getting. But it was still impressive to listen to them do it. Meanwhile, you know, going over in here in Orange County, the Golden Bear was in Huntington Beach was a real famous spot in those days, and I'd go there and watch Muddy Waters and watch Freddie King and watch Etta James and all kinds of people there. So by the time I was 14, I was actually playing in recording studios over in Santa Ana. There was a studio called United Audio, and Bill Medley used to play out of there and a lot of other people. So I'd be sitting in on sessions and stuff.
And were you a guitarist initially?
Yeah, and I'm a guitar player basically, but
Okay.
it's like all of us. You know, we're musical. So if you need someone to jump on the organ, we jump on the organ and we start playing Hammond B3s. Or you need someone to do something, you try it out and stuff. But no, most of us were guitar players in those days.
Sean, can you speak to how your intersection of learning how to play as a young teen and finding like the British invasion of like blues and soul music? Can you talk about those influences together and you growing as a musician?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I taught myself for probably the first 7, 8 years of my life. So it was just struggling along with records and doing my best. But I think what was interesting in learning that way and kind of then starting to go back and listen to kind of Albert King and BB King and Buddy Guy and all this is I started learning that it was more than just being able to play the notes. There was a panache about it. There was an intention about it that was so important. And you just, I think I was lucky in that it was part of my musical upbringing. I mean, now I'm a composer and I spend months and months writing pieces trying to kind of express my view of whatever it is my subject matter is. But I was so lucky because I learned that from some of the great, emotive people of all time with these blues players when I was young. And I learned that it was such an element of playing music was you just didn't play the notes. You had to feel the notes and you had to understand it. And I feel so lucky that I kind of got that at an early age. And I think it kind of really pushed me along. The other thing it did was made me practice 4 or 5 hours a day, And then when I finally had a teacher, great man named Michael Plunkett, he was a jazz player mostly. So he really, really kind of helped me understand what I was doing for all those years and kind of approach. So it was really kind of a bit of a exciting process that at the end I wound up, I think, listening to more blues than rock and roll or anything else because it was so at the heart of what made music so meaningful to me. We can talk about technical things at some point, just the idea of call and response and universal language and all this, they just really grabbed me. And I was too young to even know that that's what was happening, to be quite honest with you. It just did. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about music,
I love that. Yeah, we'll definitely touch on like the building blocks of blues music and what that distinct sound and feeling is musically in a bit. But asking Paul, how did you mature as a musician in the blues style?
Well, like I'm saying, I was always playing it in a way. I was always listening to it, always playing it. When the British invasion and all that came, that was the new stuff because they were doing pop music in a way that was very different. Before those guys, rhythm and blues and soul music and straight blues was often making its way into the radio. Guys like Mel Torme, were actually singing blues songs, as part of their jazz shows and stuff like that. So it was always around and it was in there. But the idea of expanding it, well, that comes from playing with other guys and then playing in sessions, in a studio, because some studio musicians cannot play live and some live guys cannot play in studio. It's a very, very strange kind of a setup because, when they say, okay, tape's rolling, go, you gotta go. There's nothing else you can do. So if you can't hit it, while you're in trouble, so just playing in that kind of an atmosphere, you had to come up with it. And I was always playing with guys that were older than I was and much more accomplished. So I'm always learning from them, which is what I still do when I'm playing with guys, because everybody I play with, I think, plays better than I do. And so I'm always learning from them. And Sean is a great player. I mean, an absolute great player. So I'm always watching him and listening to him. I mean, I've got the old fashioned feel. I know all the licks. I know all this stuff. But then you hear a little brilliant note, and you look over at Sean that's doing it, and you go, "Man, look at Sean."
It's really
Awesome.
embarrassing being here tonight.
It's all love, right?
Yeah, I appreciate it.
You both are extremely accomplished in your fields. Could you clue us into ways that the blues music diaspora plays directly into your area of study, Paul?
Well, I have a doctorate in folklore and mythology, and so blues is folk music, and my specialty is really American Indian music, but all folk music begins with rhythm and a cappella voicings. So it's foot stomping and then calling, out. It doesn't matter if we're in Africa, if we're in the Amazon, if we're in America, it doesn't matter, Asia, anywhere. It all begins a cappella without instruments, just the foot stomp or hand clap, right? And that, is such an essential part of understanding how folk music works, that, getting that part about it in the blues, because when those Africans came over, unwillingly, that's what they still had, was the memory of the call and response that they used to do in the villages with foot stomps and hand claps and other rhythmic instruments and stuff like that. And they also had that pentatonic scale, which Sean can talk about all day and all night. But again, those pentatonic minors and majors that had drifted down from the Middle East into Africa. So they had those tonalities in their minds. But what they didn't have is they didn't have the old lead singers, because they had been busted up and they weren't coming over as a village. So they had no one to lead them in the old time songs, but they still had that understanding of it. So that turned into what we call field haulers, with guys, everybody working and everybody using the rhythm together, and one guy calling out and then everybody responding together in unison. And Indians do that to this day, I'm saying, but we do it with rattles or something like that. And then as those guys started being exposed to American instruments and to other scales like major scales and stuff like that, then they just went to town. I mean, the genius came out, and it's just amazing. So for me, blues music is folk music, of course, and it obeys all the rules of folk music, and it's unique to America, and it's unique to the contributions of African peoples who came here and completely changed the way we all feel it. So blues music is American folk music, and it's imbued in every type of music we hear.
I love that. Sean, tell us more about the music of the music, the structure and the
Yeah.
and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would jump off a couple points that Paul made, and that, when you think about the actual structure of these things, the first thing I would bring up is basically the bringing of kind of spirit possession religions also, and voodoo or vodun, or depends on where you are, and what a key role that played sociologically. It was a way that they had a common language. So even though, as Paul pointed out, everyone came from different tribes and they didn't necessarily speak the same thing, there was some aspect of their lives in these religions that basically allowed them to kind of be unified in a way. And I think it would be a mistake to not realize that in blues, that's a great part of its background, is this idea of having a common language that people who don't necessarily speak the same language can interrelate, especially when they're in the sociological situation that they're in, right? So now that becomes important. To me, one of the big hallmarks that Paul also mentioned is call and response, like the Arhuli songs and the work songs. But what's so significant about blues is that the response becomes an instrument. Yeah. So someone sings something and then they play the response to themselves. It's this wonderful kind of personalization of the interaction of this kind of call and response. And you see it in churches today and all that element. It's in basically all music around the globe, this idea of, back and forth, and that's unifying people in whatever the message is at the time. So yeah, I think that's amazing. The music was, music content wise, as fairly limited in its early scope. Although in the birth of the blues, it really was kind of simultaneous with jazz in that language. If you think of Ma Rainey or Bessie Smith, they were actually singing fairly complex arrangements and things. But by the time you get to kind of Robert Johnson in the early part of the 20th century, his first guitar was a wire between two nails on a porch, and there's a great story about, I forget exactly who it was that he had seen, but W.C. Handy met a guy in a train station. And he was playing a guitar with a knife as a slide. There was all this kind of utility about what you had. And I think out of that, there was some simplification that I think gets a little, it seems overly simple, but it's really not, because everything is set up phrasally, in terms of phrases, like a joke, right? You say a line, you repeat the line, and then you answer yourself. You kind of, answer your own joke. But in terms of structure, what's really amazing is that though the chord progressions are simple, there's just so much room for expression due to that, So it leaves a lot of room to and for that reason, blues has been evolving and changing for over a century, probably century and a half, sure, and has so much room to grow because it's built into the way that music is actually constructed. And it can what's so nice about it is, we talk about rhythm and blues and then Chicago blues and Mississippi blues. It has all these incarnations because it's an adaptable thing. Right. And that'll bring me full circle in full professor mode back to the idea of how these kind of religious ideas that came from West Africa had a universal quality that also made them adaptable. And, we see whether it's Vodun with French Catholicism in Haiti or with Spanish Catholicism in Dominican Republic, where it becomes Santeria, it's adaptable. There's an adaptability to this. And I can go on, but I'll leave it at that.
Right. Yeah. That single wire, that's called a diddley bow, and that's where Bo Diddley got his name, was by reversing that, right? So yeah, it's called a diddley bow, and so you can do it with just one string. And the thing is, if you're using a pentatonic scale, then you only need 5 notes. So you can just hit one. You can play a whole blues concert with just one string. And all you have to do is go up and down those 5 notes. So like if you hit an open A, A, D, A, G, A, then that goes bop 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 bop, and that's all you've got right there. And now you're doing the Muddy Waters. You're doing man child. I say bop 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 A, and bop 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 bop, and you're just doing it. I'm saying with really 2 notes and an open note on one string. And then if you want to add a chord to it, and then you can really start to enrich it more. So you can go, wow, 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 wow. But you can always do it just on one string with 5 notes. And that's why, again, you didn't need to have an instrument. You could do it with a diddley bow. You could do it with almost anything you had. But then once people, got guitars that had more strings on them, and then they all of a sudden are opening up this question of chords and all that, and at the same time people are being taught pianos and organs and stuff. Then, as Sean is saying, that moves into then gospel music, right? And all of a sudden, the gospel music is coming, but you listen to the gospel music, and inside of it, deep down in there's ba 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 ba, or there is still that basis of blues, and the gospel music is decorating all that with such an elaborate, wonderful quality that I think is then what triggers people looking even closer at jazz. So the early ragtime and the other stuff that's coming out and stuff. It's very sophisticated at the beginning, very interesting, sort of like what Sean was indicating. When you listen to the real early stuff, it's actually quite complex, and a lot of Robert Johnson stuff is much more complex than people think. But as we moved into Chicago, and Pat Moran and guys like that started playing with distortion on purpose and stuff, and then moving it up into Muddy Waters and Buddy Guys and Albert and all those guys, they started getting to the root. What's at the center of this? And in a funny way, they started simplifying it once again, right? And so by the time you're watching Freddie King play, again, he's playing only three notes, but they'll kill you. You just listen to those three notes and you go, gee whiz. If you could just get those notes the way he gets them, it's amazing stuff. The other aspect of that is one of the definitions of folk culture is that it changes all the time. See, institutional culture freezes. So classical music is always played the same way. But folk music changes every time you play it. The performer is different, the audience is different, you're always adapting. So like Sean is saying, because it's basically folk music, then it's always changing. So Piedmont blues, Mississippi blues, all of that stuff, it's always going to be happening, and it's still happening today.
Yeah. That actually, did you have something else to add, Sean?
Well, I would jump in and just to kind of get to the question that you had asked Paul. So my music that I compose as, in kind of Western new music style, but I have lots of influences, is really about place. And I think that's what I'm very interested in, how different, just different people and places I've been myself, and how that kind of being in that place changes your view of the world. And I think that's so amazing about the blues as well. And it's I've kind of arrived to that place, much different artistic thing, by actually through the path of studying how the blues is modulated and changed and become all these different things over the years, and realizing in the end that is a product of place as well.
That's actually a really good segue to our next question. We got a few questions submitted prior to the conversation from some of our past viewers that are interested in the blues. And there were a few questions around this idea of like these regional hotspots of blues music, and like why is there a Chicago sound? Why is there a Mississippi sound? Why is there a Memphis sound? Can you speak to like the evolution of a sound that's tied to a specific place?
It's work is that when people started going up to Chicago and Detroit because there was work up there, then people then left the South and started going up, and that puts them in a new location, and all of a sudden they have literally new technology around them. There's microphones, there's other things that are happening, and it starts to change. So poor people go where the work is, and that is going to bring them into different regions and bring the music about in many different ways. But the other aspect of this that's really important is that blues also comes from white roots as well, because you've got the Appalachian music that's coming down out of there, all of that English music, which is again the same thing. It's folk music. It's just rhythm again and a cappella singing. Then you start adding instruments, and that same pentatonic, although they like the major more than the minor, they start moving into those same sounds. And then as those same poor people are looking for that same work, then pretty soon you got black people and white people and other folks joining together in a region, and they start exchanging musical ideas, and that starts a really rich flow. And then you can get into the argument of, okay, which came first, country music or blues? I think blues came first, but but they start influencing each other so much, that it's quite amazing.
Sean, what do you think? Blues or country? Which came first?
Oh, blues are I call them magical simultaneities.
Okay.
That are kind of But I think there's a lot of music that inherently arise out of much of that has to do with time period more than anything else. So the 19th century, there's a lot of shifting things in America, and so a lot of kind of demographics are changing. And Paul, alluded to this even with the folklore music, but even in Southern, we look at the blues in the South, there's Native American influence in that too. And some say the singing styles and just the idea of the working with beat and call and response. And I always think of it like food. If you take a style of cuisine somewhere else and it blends with the style of cuisine there, you're going to come up with something different, right? Cajun or Creole food, if you look in the South, they're conglomerations of all those things. The music is the same. So wherever you take it, it's an adaptable thing. It's a thing that is now in this new environment. And so it's going to begin to take in influence from all those things. And so that's why we get all these different styles. And some of them have very distinct kind of just musical expressions in them and things. Like Chicago blues is really known as an electric art, as Paul says, because there's, the technology was there. And it's city music as opposed to, basically farm music and work music. So it's another set of topics and realities for the people in those places, and that filters into the music and the style in which it's presented.
See, and that plays into the performance again, back to the folk thing, because when you're looking at juke houses and stuff in the South, everybody's poor, no one's got much there, and the performer that's going to stand up there, he's got to entertain everybody. He's got to get everyone dancing. He's got to get everyone thinking they're having a wonderful time. So he's going to dance and he's going to jump up and down and play his guitar behind his head and pluck it with his teeth and do anything that's going to get the crowd going, right? And so it's a symbiosis that's happening between the crowd and the player, and they're making a show out of it, right? It's a show. And if you can't put on a good show, if you're not a good showman, you're not a good bluesman. So and that is such an essential part of the blues performance. So when you look at, well, again, whether it's Muddy or whether it's Freddie or any of them, or Buddy Guy especially, we just saw about a year or so ago over there at Musco, right? He's a showman. He's putting on a show, and that's what you're really there to enjoy and to have a good time that night. So it's good time music.
Can you give some more examples? You mentioned Buddy Guy and like all these great people. If I was a first timer coming into learning about blues music, if I wanted to like search on Google or Spotify some artists that can like give me some really meaty things to draw me in, who would you recommend, Paul?
Oh, Jesus, everybody. I mean, the thing is, they've all got so many angles to them that it depends. If you want to get mystical, then you listen to John Lee Hooker, because you can't figure out how he's doing it. It's just absolutely amazing. The spirit that Sean is talking about, that John Lee Hooker can conjure as he's playing, and you always hear his foot tapping all the time while he's playing and stuff, and he's absolutely wonderful. But if you want to get into again the full developed show and the voice, then that's Muddy. Muddy Waters is just, you can't get around Muddy. Everybody worshipped Muddy. All the players around him worshipped him because he was the personification of everything that they were doing. So start with John Lee Hooker and listen to a little Muddy Waters, and then go to B.B. King, and then go to Freddie King. You get that down, and then you can really appreciate Albert King and some of the other guys, because then you've really got your foundation going.
Sean, anyone else to add to that playlist?
I would probably put Lightning Hopkins in there. Yeah. I think Johnny Copeland is a great player, currently still performing, and Albert Collins. I really like his guitar. Kind of sounds like a bug zapper. I mean, I never heard anything like it. It has such a unique sound.
Yeah, the Iceman.
Yeah,
that's what they call him. They call him the Iceman. Right?
The Iceman. Yeah, it's like an ice pick, right?
That's right. That's right. That Telecaster with that copper on it, So yeah.
And the older stuff like Lead Belly, if you really want to get into the kind of the roots music, and Robert Johnson, you got to listen to the essential kind of beginning of the recorded history, I guess, of kind of real roots blues music. kind of starts with Robert John. There people came before him, Henry Sloan, who they say may have been the person who kind of invented the blues, and he was a mentor to like Robert Johnson. They all were kind of together at this in this plantation in pretty well-known stories. But yeah, the recordings start kind of late. But then there's also, don't forget all the Coco Taylor, Ma Rainey,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
Bessie Smith. Like these are great American musicians, and I mean, one will lead you to the other.
Right.
Yeah.
Very nice. We talked a little bit about like different cultural influences coming into blues music and it's synthesizing and becoming something new to an extent. A few weeks ago, we presented Aki Kumar, who blends his roots as a North Indian transplant to the United States and his roots in Bollywood and pop music with blues music. Are there any other like really interesting fusions of style from international artists that you're glommed onto right now?
I listen to a lot of Nigerian music because there's like a rediscovery almost of the connection between Nigerian music and blues music. It's hard to say that that they're not playing the blues over there, but they're listening to the blues and they're saying we recognize some of that, and then they start going at it and the slinky guitar stuff, that those guys get into is just out of this world. But what's really powerful is their horns. They bring in horn sections that are just out of this world, and you could transplant into a Chicago song at any time, or even a Texas song, and it'd just be fabulous. So I'm really excited listening to African blues music right now.
Yeah, Ale Farka Toure is who I would recommend very, very highly. He just passed away a couple of years ago, but even to the point where Ry Cooder, a great kind of American blues and slide player, went over to study with him and kind of learn. He just uses all kinds of different modal techniques that the American players, I'm not sure that they never used, but that had long been forgotten. And I think, Paul brings this up and it makes an amazing point, is that when now we go back into, say some of these African countries like Nigeria and Senegal and other places along the coast there, particularly in kind of West Africa. But this music is going back now to a place that it came from, and being kind of re-injected with a new sense of its original place. And I think it's fascinating. And I agree with Paul that kind of some of the things that are coming out of even just African pop music right now, to me, is just so, it's just fascinating and kind of uplifting music, and it kind of transcends a circumstance. And I like that quite a bit. It's very joyous.
See,
I agree.
There's a big blues community up in Richmond. I don't know if you guys know where Richmond is along the bay over there near San Jose, but it's the whole town is basically black, but it's full of blues veterans. A lot of guys that were in a lot of the Chicago bands and stuff have retired out here to California, and then they moved into Richmond, and then they have bred a whole new generations of younger blues players, and those guys go into Sacramento and play in the clubs and stuff over there, and it's really some place. I mean, it's right here in California, but it's a real thriving blues community and blues center that's up there in Richmond, that unless you're actually from that community, you may not know exists. But those guys are really something.
Speaking of playing, you two have played in a band together, correct?
Sure.
Tell us more about your band and how that came about.
Oh, for 40 years, me and a handful of guys have been secretly playing blues over at Chapman and trying to keep the administrators from catching us.
Now it's out of the bag, Paul. Wait.
I know. But so from time to time, we're still able to get together and stuff, and then and play and stuff. But it's created a very interesting fraternity of alums and professors and staff members and community members from the neighborhoods, etc., who've actually been playing for over 40 years, I'm saying, and learning from each other and having fun with each other. And in the last iteration of all this, Jeff Cogan and Sean started coming in and playing, and I started rejoining some of the things that they were doing, and it's just a continual expression of it. But the latest iteration of our getting together is, I think, really powerful because we've been so lucky to have Sean and Jeff Cogan and other guys that are, they're professional guitar players. They're guitar professors. They're the real deal like that. And then still have some of the veterans who have the old feel and have the other stuff like that working together.
Yeah, and I've really enjoyed it because we've had students come out. We always kind of send out an email blast and try to get some students. And I just remember one day one of my cello students, Bella, came out.
Yeah.
And to be there, I had conducted her in a new music ensemble and other things. But to sit there and kind of trade bars with her, playing the blues with her on the cello, me on guitar, was like really special moment. And I think we have those happen quite often. Someone will show up and it becomes a kind of a magical thing. And to work with and just get that energy from the younger generation, how much excitement they have. And it just lets you know how still alive the music really is.
Right. Well, that's the thing. It's just part of what this is for me as a folk music guy is I'm trying to see, if people get a chance to play American folk music, will they do it? Are they so caught up in the European expression of music that they no longer are interested in the American stuff? And like Sean is saying, no, they want to play. They want to play, And Bala, man, with her cello, she just added some of that real rich stuff that was just, you go, wow, listen to that. It's given all this class and all this wonderful stuff. And then the guitars on top of her cello were just, it made them sound magical. But, Bala's a tremendous player,
Yeah. Yeah, Bella, shout out to you if you're watching. You're amazing. Such a great musician.
Right.
And kind of such an iconic figure on campus. You see her whiz by with the cello on her back while riding her skateboard. It's so iconic.
Sure.
Have you been able to do any music making while we're in quarantine?
Well, I'm always playing. I play every day. I play, for at least an hour or so every day. But that's just my way of scratching the itch, and I just got to play like that. But Sean's been doing some interesting stuff using the internet and other players, right?
Yeah, I've been working with a program called Jam Kazam, which is pretty successful. The aforementioned Jeff Cogan and I have done some things and finally getting it together. I think, but to be very honest, I think we're all anxious to get back to the live playing and interaction. It's been particularly tough on performing musicians and performing artists of all type. We'll always make the best of a bad situation, but we'll also be happy when we can get back to the live interaction, because that's part of what you do it for, is you want that, you feed off of that interaction with your fellow musicians, no matter what kind of music you're playing. So we're all hungry for that, but yeah, we'll keep our fingers crossed and we'll get back there.
Speaking of interaction, we actually have some really great questions that have come in from our chat. So let's move on to our question and answer moment.
Okay.
Our first question, how do you get from Robert Johnson's Crossroads to Cream's version of the song? Sean?
That's a long history, but the meaning is the same. And I think when you think about, Crossroads, that's such an interesting song, because when you look at the text and what's going on there, that's Vodun, it's voodoo. The crossroads is the place where you meet Papagede and and that when he makes a deal, right? It's the Faustian legend and it carries on. But then you take it to someone like Eric Clapton, and I think if you look at Eric Clapton's life, particularly his early life, is quite troubled, lots of issues. Yeah, I think he found a solace in that kind of idea and that type of music. And yeah, that is the product of I guess what would be called the kind of 60s revival of blues, with people like Buddy Guy, when it became electric and it became loud and that's what the kind of British, invasion jumped on top of. And I think it's really That's a seminal version of that song. I mean, it's probably the one people know more than anyone else's is the Cream version, and just the absolutely scorching, guitar work by Clapton and just solid stuff. So how do you get there? I mean, there's a lot of iterations of things in between. There's a time when blues was very commercialized and went different ways, but with this kind of revival in the early 60s, which is what kind of keyed a lot of these big changes into the electric music. Also, obviously, the invention and the more prevalent use of electric instruments and balancing those things out with full drum kits and things. There's a lot that kind of amplifies it up to that. But at its essence, the meaning and the desire for change by making whatever kind of deal you have to was present in both those men. Robert Johnson had similar problems to Eric Clapton's problems. We don't go into the details of them, but drugs and alcohol and all kinds of things. So there's a similarity in those two souls. They connected over 60 some years. Yeah.
But see, Eric Clapton and the English guys, they simplified it. They play maybe 1/3 of the notes that Robert Johnson is playing when he's playing, because Robert Johnson is going ba da da dum da dum ba da dum ba da ba da bum ba dum ba da dum ba bum 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 ba bum 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 ba dum ba bum ba, and he's got all that going because he doesn't have drums. He doesn't have anyone else there, so he's got to be providing all the sounds of the drums, all the sounds that would come from the other instruments, and he's doing it just on his own. Where Eric Clapton has the luxury of just deciding, I'm just going to play these couple of notes and go bum 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 ba dum bum 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 ba dum bum bum, but he doesn't have to do the ba da da dum da dum in between, and so it makes Eric Clapton all of a sudden sound like a soloist who is working off the genius that is, like you're saying, is there in Robert Johnson, but Robert Johnson's got to play the whole band. I'm saying on that one guitar, and that is the miracle of Robert Johnson, is that when you listen to him, you can't believe it's one guy doing it. It sounds like there must be 2 or 3 guys sitting there playing, because how does he getting all those notes and all those rhythms in and staying on beat, and he's singing at the same time live? And you go, that's impossible. So then that was the thing for us as American blues players. We saw that the English guys were extracting some of the best notes and some of the best passages, and they were framing them right in a way that gave them a new life, and that same things with Jimmy Page or any of those guys. They're framing all of a sudden these notes, but when you listen to them when they're played by old blues players and stuff, they're part of a much bigger, I'm saying, expression. There was a record, Muddy, when the Wolfman goes to London, Howlin' Wolf, and they want to play Little Red Rooster, and all the English players only know how to go bum 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 bum, and Howlin' Wolf's go, no, it's not like that. It goes dun 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 bum ba dum ba dum bum ba bum bum ba dum bum 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 bum, and Eric Clapton says, well, why don't you play it? And you can hear it on the record, and Howlin' Wolf is saying, no, you guys should play it. And they go, no, we can't do it. You play and we'll play behind you. And it ends up being this wonderful recording, and everybody's there. Eric Clapton's there, Stevie Winwood's there, everybody's playing and stuff. The Rolling Stones are there, but they're all playing behind Howlin' Wolf because he knows how to do all that other stuff, because he can put on the whole show all by himself.
Oh, I love that. Here's a good question for you, Paul. What is the equivalent to blues music in Mexican cultures?
There's lots of Mexican folk music, and the idea of Mexicans singing about legends, about things that are happening with them, comes out most easily seen in what are called corridos. All right, so corridos are again using a basic, like 1-4-5 kind of a progression with a basic scale behind it, but the performance, the expression, and the subject matter, because that's the other thing in blues music is people are singing about something, and they're talking about pain, they're talking about broken hearts, they're talking about unfair bosses, they're talking about policemen, they're talking about all that stuff, and corridos do the same thing. I'm saying it from northern Mexico up, it's all the same complaints, expressions, and hopes of poor working people, right? And it's been again contained in folk music with guitars or other concertinas or other things like that. But the closest thing that you could point to would probably be the corrido.
Thank you. Next question. We'll pass it off to Sean. Why is it when we listen to blues music that has such sorrowful and deep and sad lyrics, the music, though, makes us feel uplifted and have a spring in our step and a bounce?
Well, I think maybe a short answer would be commiseration, right? Or I always felt that maybe somebody else is so bad, I don't feel so bad about what's going on with me because this guy's lost everything, you know. But the truth is, the music, I think to some extent, it's not accurate to say that it's all about suffering. The truth is, as Paul said, it's about a show. It's about celebration. It's about getting people into that joint and drinking and having a good time and dancing. The language on which they all could interrelate were these ideas of loss, or things are tough, or traveling, or, you know, I got to go here to get work or something. Everybody could basically understand that in the places that blues developed. But once they got together, it was really about having a party, and you'll see people yelling and hollering. The worse it gets, you know, if you watch B.B. King and says, you know, I gave you 7 children and now you want to give them back. You know, the place goes wild. Like, it's just, the worse he can make it, the better they love it, you know? Yeah. And I think it's about commonality, and it's about, everybody knows tough times, but we still find the things in life worth celebrating, and being together and being at these performances and these shows and being interacting and dancing. Those are really positive things.
Right. Right. Well, you know, you got John Lee Hooker saying, I love the way you walk, you know, when you walk that walk. When you talk that talk, you know, that baby talk. You know, oh, that's, you know, that's not sad.
And I would add, there's also a lot of metaphor in blues lyrics, and things that sound sad actually are not. They're just referencing quite often fairly lurid sexual content and everything. But so they're saying it a different way. But this is, again, and I hope I'm not going on too much about this point, it's an idea of the prevalence of kind of coded language that's understandable by everyone who's kind of in the scene.
Right. See, and in folklore, that's called ethnolinguistics. You know, how people within a group communicate with each other. And that's absolutely right.
Yeah, we actually just got a question in about the connections between blues music and comedy, and like the idea of like the payoff. Can anyone speak about that?
I think that goes back to the show, you know. You know, you're putting on a show, and so, you know, I worked 5 long years for that woman, and she had the nerve to put me out. You know, that's funny. You know, it's funny stuff. You know, and at the same time, it's got all that stuff going on, and it gives you the chance to stand up there and be indignant as you're saying it, and the crowd is enjoying it. So there's a lot of comedy, I'm saying, that's going on.
Last question of the night, taking it to the personal. Besides listening and feeling the blues, what are some of your inspirations for playing the blues and improvising at home? Sean?
Well, I think for me, as a young person, playing guitar or music in general was a way that I guess I communicated it about my emotions and about my feelings about things. And learning later in life to do it actually with language. But at that time, you know, we're all troubled youth. We all have our rebellions and our things that are wrong. And I used to just focus it into the music, and it meant a lot to me. And now I think it means even more when I can get together with people like Paul and all the other players, and we share in those moments, and we feel each other's feelings in what we play. And some of it's joy, and some of it's you had a tough day, or it's a bad week, and you got to just weep a little on the guitar. It's okay. It can do what you want it to do when you are honest about, you know, what you want to get out of it, for me. And so I guess in a personal way, I've always seen playing that type of guitar as a kind of personal and emotional escape. So it just always makes me feel better to play it while, it's a solace for me. Yeah.
No, I'm with Sean. We're guitar players, so I just love the way it sounds. I just can't believe that the way those strings buzz under my fingers. I just can't believe that the instrument starts doing what it does. And Sean can tell you about this, and any player can tell you. When you get in the groove and you really start hitting it, you don't think you're playing. You think the instrument is playing, and you're just looking at it almost. And you start thinking ideas, and the instrument starts coming out with them. You go, God, I don't know how to play that, but the guitar does, and when it starts going like that, you're along for the ride, and it's the ride of your lifetime. You just can't believe how much fun that is. And if I'm here alone, I'm saying I can get in that same groove and have a ball with it. And I'm with other guys watching them go in and out of the groove. That's the kind of, again, back to that Vodun kind of a thing, like you're saying with spells and stuff. You see guys actually wind up, and then they start to really hit it, and the rest of us kind of pull back and watch them as they really start to rip it up, and you see it happening, and then somebody else will do that. One of us will stand up, all of a sudden everybody realizes, oh, here he comes. And then all of a sudden here he comes, and you just watch it happening, and that it's a magical experience. I'm just saying, and it's I also can do that with Indians when we're singing, out in the desert with rattles and stuff, and we're singing all night long. But it's that rapture, I think, right, Sean? I think it's that rapture.
It's the peacefulness that comes from being in with intuition and being open to things that, just come down through the universe. And there's all these commonalities that live in that space. I think it's just a great, great experience.
I think that's the perfect way to end our talk tonight. Thank you both so much for being here with us. Any final thoughts, Paul?
Just keep playing. No matter what you do, keep playing. I don't care where you play. Keep playing. Play with other people, and just never put it down. You're never too old. You're never too young. Just keep playing.
Sean, any final thoughts?
And keep listening. That's what I'd say. So that everybody, get out there and just track through some various artists of the blues and enjoy it. It's a language we all share. The content is for all of us, and it's wonderful.
That is our time. So thank you, Paul and Sean, so much for sharing with us and sharing your wisdom and your insight and invoking that feeling of playing. That was really, really great. And just getting that sensory feeling while watching has been really exciting for me, at least. Thank you so much again for joining us tonight. The Musco Center Creative Fund makes At the Musco Online programs like this possible, while also helping to fund the presentation of world-class artists, ensembles, and speakers on our stage in the near future, we hope. Please consider donating at muscocenter.org, and please take a moment to tell us about your experience in the chat. We would love your feedback. On behalf of Musco Center for the Arts, Wilkinson College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, and Chapman University, thank you for joining us at the Musco. We hope to see you soon. Before you leave us, please enjoy the track Walking in the Circle that will be played during the credits, performed by Brian Sherrick, Craig Brown, Albert Alva, Roy Freitas, Paul Apodaca, Sean Heim, and Jeff Kogan. Good night, everyone.